Hello. This is a time for anybody who would like to come up and share experiences that they've had at the Darshan.
Good.
Tomorrow we'll be talking more about what it's been like since the Darshan. Okay? So the first thing that we'll be speaking about is what was your experience of the Darshan? And who would like to come up and begin?
Okay, so I'm going to be the first one, which means, you can leave if you want to if curse words upset you, because I wasn't really all that holy of mind when I went to the Darshan. In fact, I forget who it was, but somebody told me that, see here, the guy that sat next to me on the flight there. Oh, sorry, what's your name again?
John Gunn.
John Gunn was next to me. He told me that on the flight there I was like asking lots of questions and seemed very nervous and upset or something like that. And then on the flight back, I was very calm.
Did he have to sit next to you again?
What?
Did he sit next to you on the way back too?
I think that was a special punishment so you wouldn't have to have another lifetime, right? So anyway, a lot of my Baba story has to go to the credit of my brother Cal, who is frustrating the hell out of me right now by not being here, because I wanted him to hear his part in the story too, although he knows it in most ways. But he's the one that first introduced me to Baba by sending me the discourses and some pamphlets and things like that. Paid for me to go to the center, the Mayor's Spiritual Center in 1967. And I was very intellectual about all this stuff and very objective. I wasn't going to be taken in by any phony cult or any of that kind of stuff. And after reading the discourses, I was kind of like, well, this guy couldn't really be God because, good Lord, he seems to know everything. And, answered thousands of questions I probably had about reincarnation, the spiritual masters, and, all that sort of stuff. And then he paid my way to the Darshan in 1969. But in the meantime, I went to college, and in college I was, let me back up 21 years. Baba enabled me to be born in time that I would be 21 years old 6 months before the Darshan. And if I was not 21 years old 6 months before the Darshan, I would not have been able to get a passport without my parents' permission and a visa, and they would never, in God's name, have let me leave to go see some phony spiritual master in India in the middle of a college semester and miss a week of college. So, I was born at just the right time, so I was 21, obviously, when I went to India. But between 67 and 69, the Vietnam War was going on, and I was getting more and more anti-war, going to demonstrations and all that sort of stuff. I became very radicalized against the war and into politics, and Baba faded out of my mind almost completely. And so basically when it came up that we were going to fly to India, I was like, okay, I don't really care that much about this Baba guy, but yeah, what the hell, I'm going to India for free, I'm going to see India, man. I'm not going to turn that down. So, and I'm sure I irritated the hell out of my brother several times while we were there. We'd be like, they'd be going in the hospital, here's Baba, the room Baba was born in, and I'm like, who cares what room Baba was born in? And then we get to the Guru Prasad and the Darshan experience, and Erich was up there at the front, and there was this this old-fashioned silver microphone that was huge. And he walked up to that and he said, it is 9 a.m. and you have kept your appointment with God. And I was like, whoa, that kind of hit me. But then the old ego mind got into the intellectualizing BS again. And I started thinking, well, this is kind of a crazy setup here, and I don't know, 130 people or 150 people or something in the room, and some of them wandering around outside looking at roses or something. But I was like, I don't want to get taken in by some cult, even though I thought I'd already been past that part. I don't want to be taken in by group hypnosis or something like that. And so I was looking around to see if is there some kind of group thing going on here. You know, it's like everybody conforming in some way that I don't want to get sucked into. I'm not going to be fooled. So I looked around and like, here's somebody over here who's crying, and there's somebody over here who's like blissed out, you know, and there's somebody over there who looks like he's falling asleep. And there's somebody else that's, you know, looking like they're meditating or something. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. It's nothing group going on here. Everybody's doing their own thing. And then they start saying, you know, okay, so you have to, you know, get up and line up on the left side here, and you walk over here, and then there's this Baba's chair and Baba's sandals at the foot of the chair, and you come up and you bow down to Baba's sandals at the chair. And I was like, oh, this is a load of horse shit. We're supposed to bow down to some damn empty sandals? Are you kidding me? And it was just like, really, this is nuts. And then Baba flipped the switch, and I felt this wave of love just descend over the whole room and God's presence. And it was very profound and very like a signature. That's like, you know, if you look at your signature and then you have somebody who's poor at, you know, trying to forge your signature, and you look at that one, you can go, oh, that's my signature. This was the signature of God. He was there. He was surrounding all of us in that room. And I was just like, oh my God, you know, the thing that's bullshit here is not bowing down to sandals. It's the stupid crap that's going on in my mind. This is just nuts to what I was just thinking. I mean, I'm not worthy to be here. Sorry. I'm not even worthy to bow down to these sandals. What kind of an idiot am I? God was all around and filling the room, and it was just such a glorious presence of God. And but I have to tie it in with another Darshan experience. I actually had like 3 or 4 or something during that Darshan, but I came back 21 years later, and I've done that 3 times now, so I've started telling people I come back every 21 years whether I need it or not. But I came back in 1990, and during that time, I'd again been sucked in by Maya. I wasn't so much into politics that time, but I actually got involved with this group of evangelical Christians, and it was kind of surprising in one way that they were slightly open-minded toward Baba, not in that they were really going to do much about it, but they promised me they'd pray on it anyway to see if it was possible that this could be Jesus again. But, you know, there was a big deal of skepticism behind that, I'm sure. But they were like, you know, you really seriously need to think about this because, you know, you could burn in hell forever if you're picking the wrong guy. And I started thinking things like, well, is it possible that Baba is not God, but that Jesus gave me the experience of God's presence when I was there in India, just because for most of my early life, you know, from like 11 to 21 or whatever, I've been a sincere seeker. So maybe it was Jesus, not Baba, as if they were separate. And so I was like, you know, I really need to check this out, like they said. And so from like 1980 to 1990, I read everything there was in English about Baba, written by Baba, biography of Baba, Baal Natu's 5 volumes. You know, Lord Mayor wasn't out yet. And I found some things that I thought might be contradictions. And it was like, I need to check this out. Because, like, if Baba said something at one point, and then he did something different later on, that's like, well, if he was really God, he wouldn't forget what he said he was going to do. And in particular, there was one thing where he had presided over a wedding at one point, and I read about this in one of the biographies. And then 30 years later, there was a photograph of him presiding over another wedding, and he had said at the first one that he would never do this again. And I was like, uh-oh, that's a problem, you know, like he can't really be God if he forgot that he told people 30 years ago he was never going to preside over another wedding. And so that was I had several questions. You know, I got a private audience with Erich, which was nice. He, you know, easily answered the other questions, and then we got to that question, and he said, well, what happened in the earlier incident was Baba performed the wedding ceremony. 30 years later, he presided over it, but someone else performed the wedding ceremony. So it was not an inconsistency. And I was like, whew. Okay, maybe those hellfires aren't waiting for me. So I was there, basically to clear up my mind on that, and I was also hoping for a bonus, like, let's have another Darshan experience here. And it didn't happen the first day, or the second day, or the third day, or the fourth day, and finally it was like the day before I was going to leave, I gave up. Baba says, don't have any expectations. So finally I gave up my expectations, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to enjoy that and have my questions answered, and then I'll head for home. And so I went to Marizad and sat on a chair that was like right, I guess, next to Baba's bed. And I was sitting there thinking about Baba, and then all of a sudden I felt the presence of God again. And it was the same, it was sort of the same thing. It was the definite feeling, God is here. But this time it wasn't like God is filling the room like in Guru Prasad. God is here in me, in my body, in my physical body. And then it was almost as if Baba was in a separate subtle body or something inside of me, and he moved himself like a quarter of an inch over just to make it clear to my consciousness, there's like two of us here, Baba and me, and he's actually intimately in my body, in every cell in my body. And I felt God's presence in me, and that made me realize what Baba meant when he made that statement about, I am closer to you than your very breath. Because he's every cell in your lungs too, which is closer than your breath. So that was like, thank you, Baba. No more hellfires for me.
All right. Yay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I just want to share 3 things that happened at Darshan that have been with me my whole life since. But so I'll tell the most important one last. So the first one, I was working at the center when Baba dropped his body, and I was at the center because I figured that would be the place that we would first hear that we could go to India, and then I could go to India. So of course we got word that there would be the Darshan, and I had to wait until then. So I thought, okay, I'll just go then. And then Baba dropped his body, and I was desolate. And I remained desolate. I did not reconcile to Baba having dropped his body. So I was at Guru Prasad one day, and I was talking to Rano, and I don't know what came over me, but I just burst out to Rano, and I said, I don't care what Baba said. I wish I had just come anyway. And Rano looked at me, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'm in such trouble. And she looked at me, and she took her finger, and she poked at me. She didn't touch me, she just poked her finger. She said, you're absolutely right. Next time, by hook or by crook, you come. So I figure I got my orders. And the second thing was something Francis said one day. He said that, I don't remember the exact word, it was the conundrum or something about the puzzle of being a spiritual aspirant, is that you have to act as though everything you do matters, knowing all the while that it doesn't. So those have been 2 really great things to have in my life. And then the most important thing that happened at Darshan, the most important thing that ever happened in my life was, I don't remember there being a line or anything.
There was no line.
Oh,
There was a
okay.
line at the very beginning, and
We
then
got
that
out
was it.
individually all over the room.
Okay, well, I don't remember any line business, but I was never a spiritual aspirant, so I didn't have any expectations or anything. I was just sitting there because Baba had said to come. And people were getting up and going up and bowing down, and so at some point I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I got up and I went up and I bowed down at the chair. And I experienced that Baba was in the chair, and he was very, very big, and I was very, very small. And he took me in his hand, and he sort of looked at me, He poked at me. He sniffed me, sort of like a mother animal would do. And then he said, "Yes, this one is mine." And he put me under his arm.
Louise.
That's funny, because I remember waiting there in Guru Prasad with all those people sitting there. I said, am I going to go up there too? Maybe I should just do it and get it over with. That's what I thought just now. We'd only been with Baba for a year and a half when he died, and he invited us. And several people have mentioned that Baba also said, don't have any expectations. So I think one of the things I learned going was I really did relax without, and that's the same as surrender. Yes. You know, just surrender. Anyway, my one little experience was I got myself up. There was the chair. I bowed down, and a voice inside me said, kiss the shoes, kiss Baba's shoes. And something else in me just wouldn't. And I started, and there were always volunteers around. And they saw I wasn't doing anything more. And I burst out crying. So they took me by the elbows. And I was crying. I said, I missed the chance of my life, you know. And they pushed me to Baba's bedroom. And they said, you can go in now. And they pushed me in. And there's another bed with a nice bedspread. I remember it had red roses on it. And there was another pair of sandals. So I said, thank you, Baba. I'm sorry I had to make you help me. But I did. It was like a thumbtack into my life. You know, I'm so glad he let me go and not totally mess it up. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Several things that have been mentioned had also happened to me. When I had first heard about Baba, which was in 1967, I went to the Monday night meetings, Fred and Ella's Monday night meetings, and I was very I had been into politics, like some of us here, and I would go to these meetings and I couldn't relate to these people because they were each one so different from each other, you know, they were a very strange collection of people, and they had nothing in common at all. There was no motivation there except for that one thing, you know. And I thought, well, okay. But I kept going to those meetings. And I could not at the time have told you why. I still can't. But anyway, one day I'm standing in my kitchen, and I had that very experience. I had my hands resting on the sink. This is an apartment on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. My hands were resting on the sink. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, an atmosphere is the best I can describe it. There was an atmosphere that changed, and it came down. It descended very slowly around my head, and as far as I was aware, right around my shoulders. And there was no voice, but there were words that appeared in my mind. And it was a very calm and very, there was a presence. And the words that came into my head were, oh, this is it. I'm home. Wow. And that's all there was to it. And I had not been looking for home. I never felt like I was homeless or wandering about in the world. I just have always been, you know, I wasn't searching for God. But I did, so naturally, when I started going back to those meetings, you know, when I kept going back, it was like 180 degrees, my life flipped, just like that. It was over, you know, everything in politics, it all just lifted off my shoulders, gone, all of that stuff. So after about a year and a half, we got the invitation for the Darshan. And I just couldn't believe it. Oh, I'm going to meet my God. You know? And when Baba slipped out the back door, as I like to say, at first I was really hurt. I was personally hurt that he would do that to me and everybody else in our group. How could he do that to us, you know? But it didn't change the way I felt about him or who he was. It made no difference. I felt like I was a little child who had been told by its father that you can't play in the street or something, and I was angry at Baba for doing that, you know, but it didn't change that he was my father. So there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to cancel the Darshan. I definitely was still going to go. So it didn't make any difference to me whether he was there or not. So the day of the Darshan, as many of you know that were on the Myrtle Beach flight, you know, our plane was not there that night. And they had to put us up in the hotel. I mean, many of you are going to mention this, so I won't go into it in depth, but they had to feed us, and they fed us free food, and the rooms were free, everything, and drink as much as we could. Well, we did. We were all so psyched to go, and then suddenly we couldn't. You know, it was like this drop. And so the shock of it, you know, we were all just hanging out, and we just drank and drank and ate. And we stayed up late partying of all stupid things. Went to bed, I went to bed around 1 or in the morning, really quite looped.
Get up early.
And yeah, the plane arrived next morning. We get on the plane, and what do? They ply us with food like every 2 hours and drink. If we ask for a drink, you know, the stewardesses are going down the aisle, say, would you like a little champagne? We'd say yes, and they just hand you the bottle. Because all our trays had all these cups and glasses on them, you know, so you just filled your cup again. And so it just kept up. It's like Baba set us up like bowling pins, you know, and knocked us down. So by the time we arrive in Bombay, we're all totally smashed, and I was actually ill. And this leads to my first day of Darshan. I was exhausted and quite sick. I had a low fever. So after the feast that was laid for us at the Sun and Sand Hotel, nobody could eat. And it was just brilliant. It was beautiful. Anyway. We went on the train, I believe. I think I was actually flown because I was so sick. Dr. Barucha was there. It's the first time I met Dr. Barucha. And so the first day of Darshan, I could not go to Guru Prasad. And again, I was crushed. I felt so sorry for myself. And I was with my husband, Bill Shearer, and everyone in the hotel. I was in the Gulmore Hotel. This is important because I was on the side of the building that looked out onto a vacant lot where stood 2 huge, enormous Gulmore trees. And at that time of year, the Gulmore drops its leaves and bursts into spectacular flame flowers. So these trees were aflame, and they were outside my window. And my room was on the 2nd floor. So I'm alone in my room on the first day of Darshan, and I had a fever, and I'm just sort of walking around the room, and I was wearing a sheet like a toga because I was sweating. And of course, it was 100 degrees outside anyway. And I'm just standing at that window, and I'm looking out at these Gulmore trees, feeling sorry for myself. And without warning, with no atmosphere, I suddenly saw Baba standing down on the ground. I'm on the 2nd floor, remember? And down on the ground, under the Gulmore tree. in just a split second, and he was kind of in that medium age, not old and not really young, and he was wearing a full-length sadra, and yet he was looking straight in my eyes on the second floor. And I don't know how to describe that, but it was perfectly natural. There was nothing alarming about it at all, and it was the only time, I think, in my life that I experienced that there is no such thing as space or time, and scale and size. It made no difference at all. His presence was there, and it was over in just a nanosecond. It was gone. But that was my first day of Darshan.
Wow.
That was my Darshan.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. It's Gil.
Not really. Jai Baba. So, as some of you know, I came to Baba 6 weeks. I came to Baba April 16th of 69. I'd had a little glimmer who he was earlier in the month, hitchhiking through Texas, which was a combination of ecstasy and agony.
Yep.
Ecstasy, he's been here. Agony, I missed him. And then my mind kicked in. So I lost it. But then later at the center, in the barn, he gave me to know who he is. And I wanted to go to Darshan. But of course, it was impossible. I had no money, no means. But he worked it out. 6 weeks later, I was with a New York flight, flying to India. I didn't know about all the preparations. I didn't know anything except he had said he'd be there. This was my chance. So, to keep it here, we filed into Guru Prasad the first day. I didn't know Baba had said he'd meet with Westerners from 9 to 11. From 9 to 11. I didn't know anything. But here was his chair with his picture and the sandals, the men and the women. And we're sitting there. I'm just waiting. And the clock struck 9 times. Erich stood up. It's 9 o'clock. You've kept an appointment with God. Everyone who's there knows. That was it. So it goes on. People talk a little bit. Yeah. See, it's true.
It's true.
People talk a little bit. You know, the Mandali. I didn't know who they were really. I gathered they were Mandali. At one point, Erich says, there's nothing you have to do here. There's no supposed to, should, shouldn'ts. Just be natural. Just be yourself. Here in India, you know, we have this custom. We bow down to the master. But you don't have to do that. Unless you feel like it, then you can. The chair is here, whatever you want. So I was sitting there and I'm watching Baba's picture and it's like his mouth is opening. My heart is exploding. And at a certain point, I feel compelled to go bow down. So I stood up, made my way between people, and I got about, I don't know, maybe 10 feet from the chair. And then I don't know what happened. I still don't know what happened. I don't know how I made the last 10 feet. I don't know how long I was there. I became aware that I was on my knees with my face as if it was on his knees, my hands on the arms of the chair, and I was wailing and wailing out loud. If I had been conscious, I never would have done that, I don't think, but I was just sobbing out loud. And I could feel my face was like this grin that could push my ears together behind my head. I was so happy. And complete, everything was complete. And then I felt these electric shocks, like powerful electricity going through my arms and chest. And I have no idea how long I was there like that. And then I felt as if I should put my head at his feet. And it was like my body moved as fast as thought, and my head was down there at his feet. And there was this like magnetism, and that was probably for about 20 seconds or something. And then I felt I should go. So I stood up, but I couldn't turn my back to him. So I backed away to the side. If you were there, you know there was a doorway to the side. And after I got through that doorway, then I turned and I took a step and I started to cry and I almost collapsed. This woman caught me and she says, "It's all right, don't be sad." I said, "I'm not sad." So I felt with this group I could share that. And there was something else, a couple of other things. I got to perform twice the song that I sang this morning, which I forgot to mention. I meant to mention I sang it with Tommy Morrow, so we sang that together. And Michael Childs was playing the guitar when we did it in India, so I wanted to mention that. The other performance I did was a comedy thing, which Baba made it strike people's funny bone, and I mean the walls blew out with people's laughter. We ended it early because the laughter was so loud nobody could hear anything. And at the end of it, I looked up, and everybody who was there knows the state Mara was in those days. She was laughing. She was laughing. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
So this morning, I told you that I was saying that Tom Rogers song, that I had gotten to the center just about a week after Bob dropped the body. And I found out about the Darshan. That was the first I knew about it. And but the deadline for getting your money in was about a week away. So I didn't know how I was going to be able to do it. And eventually what I did was I hitchhiked back to where I was from, which is Texas. So it ties in with your Texas story there. Hitchhiked back to Texas, where I grew up in Waco, Texas. And told my folks about my newfound belief in an Indian spiritual master, my Southern Baptist parents, and asked them if they would loan me the money to go to India. They said, well, they could see that it made a big change in me, but they had to think about this carefully, and so they called in their Southern Baptist minister to have a conference with me and that minister and them. So we sat in the living room. I showed the minister a universal message, and he opened it up and looked at Bob's picture, and then he closed it. And then he eventually, he asked me a few things, but he told my parents that that they asked me to go outside and wait. And then he told my parents that I was a misguided youth and I would outgrow this. And so he left. My parents and I talked, and they told me that they could see that it had really made a big difference in my life. I had stopped taking drugs and things like that. But they couldn't see their way clear to paying for me to go to India. That was just too far outside of their realm of what they could conceive of was a good thing. And so I walked outside and I thought, well, this is it. You know, I've gotten the invitation from God himself to come to India, but it's just, there's just no way that's going to happen. And I wept for a while, and tried to resolve myself to the idea that, as Baba said in the circular, that somehow, some way, you will have my darshan even if you can't go. So I tried to do that. This was now early March, perhaps. And within a day or so, I got a letter from my old buddy, college roommate, Ralph Jackson, and he had a check for $400 in there. And then, within a couple of days more, I got a letter from Kitty, whom I had met one time, that previous visit to the center, and she said, however much you need, I'll loan you the money. So I had just enough time to get my tickets and visa and so forth, and was able to go to the darshan. And I had a wonderful experience. We got there on, I was part of the, because I came in so late, I was part of the overflow group with the Myrtle Beach flight. And so we got there on April 23rd, 1969. And we were there a day before the rest of the other group, the whole rest of the group. And we went to Guru Prasad, and it was just the 30-so people in the overflow group. So we had a wonderful opportunity to have some time with the Mandali. And so we enjoyed that. And at the end of that day, I met Mani, and I had an incredible experience of Baba's love. Just blasted me off my feet. And that lasted for days. I was just in a blissful state because I really felt Baba's love come through so much. So that was a wonderful experience. 50 years to the day after that, we closed on our house in Asheville.
That was just last week.
That was just last week. Then one day, as you all know, we were taken around in big groups to all the Baba places. So we saw the hospital where he was born, the high school where he went to high school, and a few other things. And we went to Baba's house, the pumpkin house. We saw the pumpkin house, and then we went into Joel's book room. So there was 200 and something people waiting to get into Joel's book room. And I didn't want to wait in that long line to get in there. So I didn't go in. The next day, we had the afternoon off. So I and two other people rented a rickshaw. And we went back to Baba's house. We went into Joel's bookstore. Joel's bookstore had been picked clean by the big, huge group. So there were just like 7 or 8 books left on the shelf. So I picked 2 of the books, and I walked outside. One of them was Stay with God. I walked outside, paid Joel for the books, and walked outside. And when I opened up the copy of Stay with God that I had, this is what I found. Was Baba's signature. So that book had been left after everybody else had looked at it, and I was just stunned. So I went back in. I said, Joel, this has got to be a mistake. And Joel was equally stunned, and he said, no, this was meant for you. And I had been wondering what I was going to do after the darshan. And for me, that was the answer. It doesn't matter what you do, stay with God. That was the answer. Then, where's David? Is your brother here yet?
Apparently not. I don't know where he is.
So after the darshan, a month after the darshan, I got drafted. My old buddy Ralph Jackson got drafted, and his brother, Cal Bullock, got drafted. And we were all sent to an Army base for conscientious objectors for basic training. And so we all ran at the same place. And I didn't know that your brother had been drafted. So I was going through the lunch line, and the person behind the counter slapped a pat of butter on my tray and said, Jai Baba. And that was his brother, Cal Bullock. So the 3 of us would sit and reminisce about the darshan every afternoon during our little bit of free time when we were polishing our boots to get ready for the inspection the next day. We would talk about the darshan and talk about Baba. So we had a great time there. Jai Baba.
Well, like many others, I first heard of Baba in 1967. And I was living in New York City. And I had been searching for, what's the meaning of this? What can we do? And I had been doing that for years and years, and tried this and tried that. And at the time, people were taking LSD, and many of the people who did it for spiritual purposes, not just to get lost in it. And I thought, well, maybe that would help me. So I was someplace in New York, I don't remember where, and I met this guy, and he said, I know an English professor with a PhD who has had LSD trips. Maybe you could get in touch with him and he would help you. So I got the phone number and I called him, and his nice voice answered the phone, and I told him what I was looking for, and he says, I'll be right there. And I waited, and pretty soon the bell rang, and I opened the door, and there stood this short guy with the biggest grin I've ever seen in my life, and he said, I'm going to tell you who you're looking for. It's Mayor Baba. and it was Bruce Hoffman, that probably many of you know. And he gave me a picture, a card of Mayor Baba, and I felt something in my gut just vibrate. And I didn't know what that meant. Immediately my mind went to the Dickens Christmas Carol where Scrooge sees ghosts, and he says, this is a bit of beef, an underdone potato, there's more of gravy than of grave about it. And I kind of felt, something I ate or something or what, I didn't know. But I kept looking at that picture, and the eyes in the picture seemed to follow me around. And I felt change is coming. And I didn't know what it meant, and I hadn't been looking for Oriental masters or anything like that, so I was a little reluctant. But Baba began working on me. And before you know it, I had quit my job and moved to my place in the country, in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, where it was peace and quiet. And Bruce Hoffman kept bugging me. He kept sending me letters, and he actually came to my place in Massachusetts. And he wanted to know a phone number, and I didn't have a telephone. I still don't have a telephone. But I gave a neighbor's number and said, if you can need to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me there. And I went to dinner at my friend's house with my friend Peggy from New York City, and the phone rang, and it was Bruce Hoffman wanting to talk to me. So I talked and said, hello, Bruce, and he said, I'm in Pittsfield, and come over. And to a New Yorker, they seem that, if you're in Massachusetts, you can come there and be there in 10 minutes. But Pittsfield, is an hour and a half away. And I was about to sit down to dinner, so I said, I can't do it, Bruce, And all of a sudden, over the telephone, I got this vibration. And I felt it through my whole body. And I didn't know what it was, but I said, I gotta go, Bruce, and I hung up. And I fell to the floor and prostrated myself. And I felt the glory of God, and that something was here now. I just knew that something was here that would change my life, and that happened to be Mayor Baba. So that convinced me more. But I also was becoming friends with a group near where I live called the Brotherhood of the Spirit. And they were mostly young people who had taken LSD and had spiritual experiences and had organized a commune. And people who joined gave everything they had, and you lived communally in a building that they had erected. And I felt drawn to them. So I joined the commune, and I gave my money, and I had a car, and that went too. And, well, I lost the money, and they wrecked the car. But during this time, every once in a while, there would be a meeting at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And I would attend that meeting. And I would come back to the commune all aglow with the with Baba's word, and they would ask me, "Where have you been?" And I would say that I went to hear Baba talk, and I mentioned Baba to them, and they knew about Baba, but no one became really interested. But I kept attending. And Bruce Hoffman sent me a note saying that he was going to speak at the University of Massachusetts. Would I like to come? So I did. And I went down again. And I was surprised when I opened the door to this meeting room. There were hundreds of people in the room. And so, hundreds of people were interested enough in Baba to attend the meeting. And I entered the room and I just stood there because I felt immense waves of love passing over me. That Baba was sending out love to everybody in the room, to everybody everywhere, it seemed like to me. And I just melted. I knew Baba's love, and I felt it everywhere in my body. And I sort of somehow got a seat. I don't know how I got there. They gave a speech, and I couldn't tell you what was in the speech. I was so transfixed. And after the talk, I went up and said hello to Bruce. And Bob Cushman was there, who used to work on the center. And we became friends, and he lived in a town very close to me in Massachusetts. And another man whose name I've forgotten. And we just talked and talked and talked. And I went back to the commune, and as soon as I walked in the door, everybody looked at me and said, "Where have you been?" And I was just glowing with love and knowledge of Mayor Baba, and I said, "Mayor Baba is my master, I know that now." And the leader of the commune, who I didn't really trust wholly, said, "Maybe you should split now." And so I left the commune, and I went back to my house in the hill, and I kept in touch with Bruce and Bob Cushman, and they told me about this wonderful couple in New York, Fred and Ella Winterfeld, and that they gave meetings on Monday night. So I went down to New York and stayed with friends, and I met Fred and Ella, and I went to their apartment, which was a wonderful place. You could feel Baba's presence there. Ella had a picture of a new poster of "Don't Worry, Be Happy." And I saw that and I said, I have to have that. So I grabbed it from her and not thinking of like, no, this is something you have to pay for. And I rolled it up and kept it close to my heart. And sweet Ella never said, that'd be $4.95 or whatever. And I took it home with me. And I went to other meetings and stayed in New York for a while. And there was beginning talk about going to India to meet Baba. I didn't have any money. I had given it to the commune. And I didn't have a car left either because they had wrecked the car. So I really didn't know what to do. But one day when I was back in Massachusetts, I remembered that when I was working, there was a plan that I had joined where they would take out so much every month out of your salary and put it in the bank savings account. And it just went, and I forgot all about it. Totally forgot about it until I realized that this could get me to India. And I didn't have any idea how much money was in there, but I found out, and guess what? It was enough money to go to India. And by this time it was early winter, and there was a big snowstorm. I don't have a telephone, and the nearest telephone is a mile away in town. And I went through the snowstorm and got to the phone booth in the town hall and called Fred Ella and said, "I'm going to India!" And found out what I had to do, and then I decided on January 30th, that I would go down to New York and get a passport and shots and finalize my trip to India. And when I got there, I called Bruce Hoffman, and he wasn't home, and I left the number where I was staying. And the next day he called me, and he was very serious. He wasn't his usual ebullient self. And I said, "What's wrong, Bruce?" And he said, "What would you think of somebody who promised you something and then didn't keep it and died?" And I thought about it, and he said, "Mayor Baba dropped the body." And at first I didn't know what to think. And then I said something that was spontaneous, but ever since I've been glad I said it. I put my hand over my heart and I said, "Someone who can awaken such love within me, they can't die. This love is eternal." And I really felt that, and I felt that ever since. That I missed Baba in the flesh, but I felt Baba within, and that was the most important thing. So,
You're going to tell us about the pot?
yes. I was still in touch somewhat with the commune, and I would drop by and see my friends, and there was real love there, and I loved them, and they loved me, and yet I didn't go back to be with them as a member. And I didn't know what to do at first, so I stayed in New York, but eventually I went back to my place in Massachusetts, and I went to the commune and said that Mayor Baba had died, and we were still going to India. And they said, "Why are you going to India if he's died? You know, that's stupid. Why are you doing that?" And I tried to explain it to them, and they just didn't get it. And to speak at their level, there were a lot of young guys and rough women too, for that matter. And to get to them to explain sort of, I said, "I'm not going to India to see the Patti Piston." And they sort of got the message. So when I was in India, and we went to Marazad, and I went into Baba's bedroom, and I was looking at where Baba had dropped the body very recently, and I was feeling sad, yet realizing that love was still there. All of a sudden, Mara's dog came bouncing into the room, came right over to me, lifted its leg, and peed all over me. And in messing with the dog, I hit this thing with my arm, and I looked, and it was Baba's potty chair. And I immediately realized Baba's joke. And I didn't tell anybody, but inwardly I thought, "Oh, this is wonderful. Baba's sense of humor just was great." And I went back to Pune that day, and I told one person, his name was Seymour, and he was from Miami, Florida, and I don't think I've seen him since. But he was an older man, and staying in the same place, a house for men in Pune. And he told the next day, which was the last day that we were in India, he told Erich the story, and Erich loved it. And he said, "Go get him." And so I was sitting there on the floor in Guru Prasad, and I felt a tap on the shoulder, and Seymour said, "Erich wants to see you." And I thought, "Erich wants to see me? What have I done?" But I went to the side and walked back, and Erich gave me this big hug, as he does, and he says, "I love your story, go tell it." So he pushed me out into the front, and it was the last day, and people were a little sad that we were leaving, and it was over and everything. And I told the story, and the roar from the crowd just was overwhelming, and the mood was broken, and I think people found it easier to accept the fact that we were leaving. So Baba arranges everything. And, you know, all of this happened to me so I could help the Darshanis.
So I came to Baba in 1967. There seems to be a theme here. And so we had all this contact with Kitty and Elizabeth and all this focus on obedience. And we had all these family letters. And so the net result was that when, through what seemed like miraculous circumstances, we got the money to go to India, I came home one day from my work. My youngest daughter was 5 days old, and so my mom was there because she was helping Barbara. And I went to the door. My mom looked so serious, and she or Barbara said to me, "We just got word that Baba has dropped the body." And the first thing I said, because, you know, Baba had sent all these various cryptic messages in the form of family letters, you know, and there was all this focus on Baba's humiliation and the breaking of his silence and apocalyptic developments and all that, that we ate that stuff up. We loved that kind of thing. So the first thing I said was, this is his humiliation, that he's left the body early. That was what I was thinking. And then the second thing I said was, I still want to go to India. And it's because I always loved the idea of India. I always loved every exotic Asian Oriental thing there was, and I expected India to be this fascinating foreign place, like going to Bali or something. And so, and then Baba had given all those cryptic comments about a darshan like no other. I'll be very strong then. I'll give darshan reclining. All these hints that it wasn't going to be what everybody expected. It was going to be something different. So I could just see so clearly, yes, Baba invited us, we must go. And sure enough, I was worried that so many people would drop out that it would get canceled. And I really, really wanted to go. So fortunately, everything worked out. A lot of people said, yes, yes, let's go. They had heard the same hints that I'd heard, and they put it all together. So yes, we got to go, and I was on that. My name is John Gunn. I don't have a name tag. I was on that same flight that Chris Barker, not the same flight, but the same visit that Chris Barker was on. The one in which the plane didn't work and we had to leave the next day. And when we got to Mumbai, this was the old days, and the Bombay airport was like it was like a cinder block building practically, you know, and so there's nothing like a jetway. So the plane landed, and here I am expecting this exotic foreign place. And they crack open the door of the plane, and the smell of Mumbai comes rolling into the plane. And it was a colossal shock to me. It was like, I'm home. It was so visceral. It was like really an astonishing feeling, because it was the opposite of what I was expecting. I was expecting to go to some place that was weirdly different. And what I got was, I've gotten home. And that started my love affair with India, which goes on to this day. My sweet wife has indulged and also gotten to appreciate that now we go to India every year for long periods of time. I'm in heaven the minute I get there. So in any case, that was my first big surprise. So then, the first day of Darshan, you've heard Eric said his wonderful thing that he said to every group, that you've kept your appointment with God. What a sweet thing. Then we had a speech from Francis Brabazon, which I was kind of but reading it afterwards, I discovered this is a really beautiful speech that Francis wrote, really beautiful. I didn't get it at the time. So then we had this experience of just sitting in silence, and one at a time, when the Spirit moved you, you would go up and bow down at Baba's chair. And naturally, bowing down was a new thing to all of us, really. None of us were bower downers up to that moment. The addiction started on that day. So, and I was sitting there, and I think, as a kind of a brainy intellectual type guy, it's always a a special treat for me when my heart opens up just the tiniest little bit, you know? It's a refreshing change from all this analytical, mental stuff that's going on. And I think that is the day my heart was the widest open ever. And I was sitting there and I was just constantly repeating, Baba, I want to love you more and more. Please help me love you more and more. And I got myself into this wonderful state of open-heartedness that I haven't quite re-experienced. So then I got to bow down in Baba's chair. I didn't see any visions or anything, but it was a really beautiful experience. And then at the 11 o'clock time, when we filed out and we were urged to go visit Baba's bedroom, then Mani was standing outside the door, and she went like this, and she gave me an embrace. And I swear that and it was not a little quickie hug and go. It was like a protracted, incredible enfoldment. And Chris Barker was saying that Mani had given him that experience. I literally felt like Baba was treating me to the feeling of being embraced by her, that Mani was treating me to the feeling of being embraced by Baba. It was so powerful. Then I went into Baba's bedroom, and I'm not a real sensitive kind of guy who gets all vibrations, but back then I was a lot more sensitive than I am now. At least I imagined that I could feel like the feeling of Baba's bedroom in the center and the feeling of the lagoon cabin, and they didn't just feel like somebody's living room, and they had a kind of a zingy feeling, and you can even feel your teeth vibrate a little bit, you know. And I went into Baba's bedroom, and it was incredibly powerful. So the whole morning was just a total knockout. Now the rest of the program, the remaining 3 days at Guru Prasad, they were completely different experience, because the Mandali, they were accustomed to what life was like around Baba. It was like a circus. And if it ever slowed down, people would be coming in, they'd be having interviews, Baba would be talking to this person, that person, looking, it was like lively. It wasn't pathological introverts like me sitting around and meditating, you know. And in fact, if it ever slowed down, Baba would say, tell a joke, you know. I mean, just to keep, so they thought we should be treated to that kind of atmosphere. And so what did we have? We had Henry Kashauti playing his trombone. We had skits. We had endless folk guitars. I don't know how there was a room in the plane for as many guitars as everybody brought. Not to mention that then they also took sitars home with them too. So anyway, those remaining 3 days, there wasn't that opportunity to just get into that heart open zone, because it was just a show. It was a show for our benefit, you know. And I know they meant well, and I'm sure everybody else appreciated it, but I was frustrated. It was like, let's have a little peace and quiet here, you know. But it was still very sweet. So that's most of what I had to say, but I had one experience of being saved by Baba during Darshan that was, I think you'll find it entertaining. So we have this day when we're touring around, and all these wonderful Baba lovers had come to be our guides and assistants and so forth. And the guy who was in charge of showing us Babajan's tomb, which is not that far from Guru Prasad, not that far from our hotels anyway, was Minu Karas, who was hilarious. He was a hilarious guy. And so Barbara Scott, my ex-wife, and Scott Simmons and I missed the whatever conveyance took the group to Babajan's tomb, and we were running a little late. So we got a rickshaw and we separately raced over there. And when we got there, everybody had already had time to kind of sit inside, and Minu Karas was standing. There's a brass rail around the place where Babajan's body is buried. And so he says to us, like he's a college professor, he says, there are 4 ways to take darshan at the samadhi of a master. Way number 1, you go like this. Way number 2, and he bows down at the brass rail. Way number 3, and he bows down the way we would at Baba's sandals. Way number 4, and he prostrates himself, right? And he was being funny, but it was also good coaching because we didn't have a clue what to do. I mean, we'd pay people with our left hand, and I don't know, we had so many, we'd point our shoes at Baba and stuff like that, so we had needed some India coaching. So he was giving us the coaching. So then everybody did one of the four. They picked method 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then they all left, and Scott and Barbara and I stayed behind for a while, so we could just sit, feel the vibes. It had a wonderful feeling in there. It was a really nice feeling. So after we had sat there for 5 or 10 minutes, then it was time for us to leave. Now there's a tomb attendant there. He's the guy with the peacock feathers, and he taps you on the shoulder. He's sweeping away your impressions and stuff, so he gives us the full peacock treatment, right? And then he goes over to this cabinet mounted on the wall, and he opens up the cabinet, and there's a picture of Baba about this big. And he's like certifying himself, see, I'm with him, right? And then he has this donation box, right? So, and he naturally wants us to make a donation. So I think I put in 20 rupees. And 20 rupees back then, it was $3. It's like a day's pay for a worker, because it was 7.5 rupees to the dollar. Now it's 75, so it's quite different. So I put in this donation. I didn't have a clue how much to give, But then he starts talking to me in Marathi, very agitated. And he's pointing at Baba's picture, and he's pointing at me, and so on. And I can't figure out what he's saying. And Barbara and Scott and I were kind of like trying to get what's the message here, And after about 5 minutes, we realized what he was saying. Because he had about very small amount of English. He's saying, Meher Baba has been too good to you. Too good to you. And your donation should be a lot bigger because you're fortunate and I'm a poor, miserable, poor guy, right? Well, not only was that disappointing because when he's pointing to Baba's picture, we thought he was trying to tell us, oh, I had Baba's Darshan, or something uplifting like that. No, it's just an envy thing, right? So, and what's more, he's kind of crossed over the line into being a beggar. You should give me more money. And Baba had given us a strict order, no giving money to beggars, right? So we just want out of there so badly. So all three of us turn and leave as quickly as we can get out the door. Well, his haranguing us has attracted a crowd of about 20 people who are, it's an open, it's not like a closed building. It's got openings, archways or something. So the crowd starts following us as we're walking away. And the women are pointing to their children and they're going like this, oh my God. And we can't give them any money. We don't particularly want to, but we also can't because Baba has ordered us not to, right? So we try walking a little faster. We don't break into a run. We were tempted, but we didn't break into a run. But we're trying to escape, and we go maybe 50, 60 feet, and now it has thinned down to about 5 or 6 of the hardcore beggars, right? And what are we going to do? And this Indian Fiat comes driving up, screeches on the brakes, the back door pops open, it's Jal Esirani, Baba's brother, and his driver. He says, get in, get in. So we hop in the back seat, and he scoots us away. So he Baba gave us this rescue, Baba he goes like this all the time, and being out of the body hasn't stopped that one bit. So that was just a little reminder to us that he's watching out for us. And anyway, I'm so pleased and so grateful that I got to go to this. And that's it. Thank you.
Yes, okay. First day.
What's your name?
Ellis Pines was on the Myrtle Beach trip. And actually it's about something I just was feeling as I've been hearing the last few reminiscences. And that is when we arrived by train at night and we're walking to where Charles Haynes is going to tell us which hotel we're in. I remember he was calling out our names or whatever. I remember walking with Jarl. And I said to him, I didn't know what to say, of course, but I said, how does it feel to be the Avatar's brother? And he just, without a second, he said, we are all Baba's brothers and sisters. And I think that was the theme of the next day. because I remember being defensive and thinking, well, what if I don't feel anything? You know, what if I go up to the chair? And because I saw Dot, I saw the people I knew from Chicago, and I saw Dot, and she was in tears as she came back from the chair. And then I saw Dee Dee Mavris, and my wife and I lived beneath Dee Dee, and Dee Dee was so, I'm so glad I'm going to get to see her tomorrow. Dee Dee was so important to me in coming to Baba because everything with Dee Dee was so practical. I just looked at her as being such a stalwart. I don't know how many of you know her, you know, veterinarian here. Just so practical and down to earth, and she helped me so much. You know, I'd come back to school at Northwestern, and she was a graduate student at that time, and she just, everything like that. So, you know, I really leaned on her a lot. And then she came back from the chair, and she was also in tears, which really surprised me. Because we had been together on the day when we found out that Baba had dropped his body, and there was like a moment of a tear, and then it was on to lots of other things and stuff. So I thought, what's going to happen to me? And I had this image, like when I was little, and I was on a high diving board, I remember, and I really didn't want to be there, and I really didn't want to jump, and this lifeguard was screaming at me, and the people behind me were screaming at me, and I had to jump. And it was sort of like, well, I guess I have to go down. And I bowed down, and what happened, it wasn't at that moment a big emotional as much as it was that everything lifted. Everything just kind of went up. All the worry, the defensiveness, the anxiety, everything went up. And I was so glad, when I think about it, so glad that that happened. Because when I turned around and we were all together, do you all remember who were there? That wonderful unity we had that day? People just coming up that you didn't know and embracing and everything like that. I mean, it was, I thought, this is it. This is the new humanity. We're here. This is the oneness, total oneness. It was just like that. And I remember kind of drifting off to that side door, and Mayerji was sitting in there, and he looked so somber. You know, and I realized, of course, they're still processing, if we can even call that, the greatest grief you could probably have. And not knowing, and I don't know how, you know, later, of course, the monthly, they got into that somewhat, they could, as much as they could, that feeling of being, for us who were young, and we were free to, in a sense, just be with each other and forget who we were or where we came from or what our backgrounds were, what our religions were, or what, any of that. It was all gone. But I still wanted to have what Dot got and what Dee Dee got. So I can't remember which afternoon it was where the men stayed in the main hall and the women went to the side hall to be with Mero. Was that the first day or was that the next day?
I think it was the first day.
First day? Okay. So I go into to that, and I'm sitting very close to the front, and Erich is at the microphone, as he always would be. But now, you know, the focus is on him. He was always there translating Baba, of course. And he starts telling those stories. And he tells the story about the wonderful stories, like the one where he's on the train and Baba was telling him, asked this man about the musts, that wonderful story. And Baba's incognito, and the man starts upbraiding him, saying, "Where are you from?" He says, "Well, Ahmednagar." He says, "You're asking about musts, and you're from Ahmednagar? Do you know who lives in Ahmednagar? Mayor Baba, the Avatar, and you're asking about musts? How terrible. What is this generation coming to?" And Erich looks over at Baba, and Baba says, and so Erich has to keep asking him and keeps getting upbraided. You know, "Oh, you're how stupid you are, how dumb you are. Mayor Baba lives there, and you want a must?" And Baba keeps going, "Find out." So they finally get to the where they're going, the station, and Baba, they come out, and Baba says, "Okay, now give him my picture." So what? Once Baba's Darshan, and Baba comes over and he gives him Darshan, and he's still screaming at Erich. How dare you, look at it. So somehow that day just opened up something, I think it was like like John says, because I could also be really heady, and there was something that just opened up at that moment, and the tears came. And I crystallized it around that it was Erich. And I remember, with Baba coming through Erich, but I was just so moved, and I had never felt feelings like that, ever, in my whole life, had never felt feelings like that. So I went up to him, and I put my arms around him, and I kissed him, and I said, "I love you," and he gave it. He'd never been the center of attention. Nobody would do that kind of thing, And then one other aspect of that was leaving and being on the train to leave. And I really didn't want to leave. I had no desire to leave. And so I was married at the time. My wife was sitting next to me, and the train starts to pull out. We were sitting backwards, I don't know, on the deck in Queen, or somehow we were sitting backwards, so I'm looking backwards. And there's like the bookend. Remember I said Jal was at the beginning as we were walking? And Jal waved a handkerchief like this. Do you all remember, any of you ever see that? He waved a handkerchief to say goodbye to it, and then the floodgates just went. I just couldn't stop crying. And these women behind me, these older Baba lovers, like old ladies, probably our ages now, but they're saying, "Oh, look at that young boy." He's just Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. I think that Darshan
Yeah.
started.
Who are you? Who and where?
Who are you? Oh, sorry, Lisa Gilland Morris, and I was on the Myrtle Beach, New York flight. I call it that. In 1967, I was living in Chapel Hill, and I heard of Baba along with John Gunn and all those people. But I went to the center a lot with friends then, and
Just don't step too far back. You're good.
okay. And it was a nice place to be, but I didn't love Baba, didn't move me. I just thought he was a good guy. But then in 1968, my parents lived in Charleston and my father was in the hospital. And my mother called me, I was living in New York at that time, and said, "Please come, your father is in the hospital." And what he was in was a psychiatric hospital because he has alcohol poisoning. And suddenly I realized what had happened all my life was that I had had an alcoholic father and I hadn't known. So I went to visit him, and then I called Kitty at the Baba Center and said, "I'm on my way back to New York." And she said, "Oh, it's Baba's birthday and all your friends from Chapel Hill are here and you must come right now." So this was 1968, you can just hear it. And so I got on a bus and I went, and all my friends from Chapel Hill were there, and I had an experience of Baba's love for the first time. And then I moved to Myrtle Beach shortly after that, because that was it for me. I wanted nothing more than to think of Baba, and I was blissfully happy, which lasted about 2 weeks. But anyway, I moved there, and I worked with Kitty, cleaning cabins and cleaning Baba's house. And at that time, the emphasis was on Baba's going to call us very soon. Be ready, we have to be ready. He may even come here. So we had to keep the center just right. And there was cleaning Baba's house one day. And I was the only one in Baba's house that day, cleaning. And there were all those Venetian blinds that go across, really dusty. And I thought, what if Baba comes and he runs his finger along the Venetian blind and he looks at the finger and he looks at me. So I cleaned every single Venetian, it was like that. Just the whole thing was about Baba coming or us going. It was about finally seeing and being with him. And then we got the call to come, but I didn't have any money, so I moved to New York and I worked in a restaurant. And I've forgotten when we heard, but it was a Saturday night rush at Max's Kansas City in New York. And there was a phone call for me, and I had stakes out every arm, and I was rushing around. And someone came and said, "It's about your father." And they looked really serious, and I thought, oh my God, my father has died and now I will have to grow up. That was my first thought. So I got rid of the stakes. I went to the phone booth and I called my friend and I said, what's happened? And she said, Meher Baba has dropped his body. And my first thought, people, I'm really embarrassed, was, oh good, now I won't have to go to India and give up my ego. That changed very quickly to, am I going to go? What are we going to do? But I don't remember all these details, but Jim tells me that there was a meeting that night and Fred herded us all together and said, we're going, this is what we're going to do, so I went. And at that point, I was kind of getting together with the person who later I married, Eduardo Nunez. And we went out to the airport, and Fred had said to all the men, you have to wear suits, you know, because this is Meher Baba, we're going to all wear suits. And he didn't have any other suit than a black wool suit. So he was wearing his black wool suit, and we got into the airport, and we were riding down the escalator. Nobody had a clue about what to expect, or whether Baba even knew we were coming. And as we rode down the escalator, Begin the Begin came on the music, and I thought, okay, this is going to be all right, I think. So all those things happened that you've heard about, and we got off the plane, and I never had the feeling of being at home like other people had. I just thought, oh my God, the heat. And we stepped out on these metal stairs, and I thought the stairs were heated. And there was poor Eduardo in his black wool suit, which lasted about 10 minutes. He was taking big off. But anyway, so just to go to the first day of Darshan, which is about all I remember. Erich stepped up to the mic, and my memory was that he said, you have crossed the ages of time to come, and it is now 9 o'clock, and you have kept your appointment with God. That's what I remember. I don't know, maybe it wasn't like that. But anyway, we were all sitting on the floor, and there was no line, but there was a line the third day. And I thought, how are we going to do this? What if we all stand up at the same time, or people bump into each other? But that never happened. One by one, people would go. And years later, Phyllis Frederick told me that what she saw at the Darshan was that Baba would go around the crowd and touch each one on the shoulder, and they would get up and go. So when I got up, I just didn't have a clue. And I just put one foot in front of the other, and there was a rug in front of Baba's chair. And I stepped off the carpet onto the rug, and it was like stepping in deep down into clouds, one foot after the other, down and down. And I got to the chair. I know that I went down. I don't know what my head landed on, what my hands were on. Everything just blanked out. And that was it. That was it for the rest of the time. I pretty much don't remember anything. I remember one or two things here and there, but that was the main thing. And there you have it.
Yay, Baba.
I have no idea what I'm going to say, but I want to mention what Elaine said about the night before. First of all, I was living in Woodstock at that time, and I was so excited about going to India. I couldn't sleep the night before. Then when our plane was delayed a whole night, I was even more excited, and I couldn't sleep. So by the time I got on the plane, I was exhausted, but did I sleep on the plane? No, I did not. I drank on the plane. And that's when I learned why you're not supposed to drink on a plane. But everyone was drinking on the plane. It was amazing. They were bringing like bottles of vintage wine and just sticking them on your trays and stuff. One thing I remember about the flight was Bob Brown going up and down the aisles with his guitar. Do you remember that? Yeah, that was really something. Try that now and you'll end up in jail. Okay, so we got to India, and I remember getting out of the plane and really wanting to kiss the ground. But it felt like that would be too weird. So I didn't do it, but I felt like I am home. And strangely, now that I live there, it's like, no, I'm not. But at that time, I just had that feeling. And my memories of Darshan are very, very scattered and not very clear. So it's been very good to hear all of you guys because it brings back certain things. And I only remember snippets. I couldn't tell you what happened on any one day. But I do remember Eric saying, "You've kept your appointment with God," and I thought, oh my God, that's something. I'm not sure what that means, but it made an impression. The next thing I remember, and I don't know if it's the next thing that happened or not, but the next thing I remember is Mayra coming out and garlanding Baba's picture. Now, none of us really knew much about Mayra. We had heard of her, and we knew she was Baba's closest woman disciple, I guess you'd say. That's what we thought. But I wasn't, and it never occurred to me we were going to meet the Mandali and that they were going to be a life force, a life-changing force in so many lives. And when I saw her garlanding Baba for a moment, I saw her as the queen of the universe. It was clear to me who she was. I just got it. And sort of the next thing I remember was bowing down that first day. And I was one of the last people to go, not the last, but there were maybe 10 people in there. And I remember standing, not sitting, but I was just standing sort of observing people. And one friend of mine who went during that time, I somehow saw Baba lifting her sanskaras. I can't explain it, but I thought, wow, that's something. You know, and now I realize, yeah, he was probably doing that to everybody, but, you know, I was just unveiled for that little minute. Anyway, I went up and I bowed down, and I don't really remember much about it, except I did it. And I wasn't uncomfortable about it. It's just, when I was standing there, I was so happy just standing there, being there, and seeing all these other people bow down to Baba that I was in no hurry to go and take darshan. So that I remember. Then I'm going to jump ahead to the day we went to Marazad and Mehrabad and the trust office in ST buses that were clean. But after that, there's not much I can say to commend them. The good thing is we were young, because now the idea is horrifying. A lot of heads are going, So we got there, and I remember, did we go to the trust compound first?
Yes.
I think we did. Anyway, it was 120 degrees at the trust compound. And people were starting to drop like flies. And one of them was John Gunn's brother, Brad. And people were also, by this time we had chair mania. You see a chair, you bow down. You see another chair, you bow down. We don't know which chair is which. So, a lot of people, by the time we got there, were kind of ill. Oh, and no one was really telling us to drink water. I do remember stopping somewhere and being told, no, don't drink any water, have a thumbs up. So we did, and you watch the guy pick up the straw from the dirt, go rinse it out, and put it in your soda bottle. That's what I remember. I told you, my memories of Darshan mostly are not very profound. So
So we're in the trust compound, and we're being shown things, and there's 156 of us, I guess, or at least most of us are there, and everybody's bowing down, and one person goes into a room and bows down on a bed. And who's on the bed? Brad Gunn. And I happened to be I was behind him or something like that, so I saw this. And Audie comes in at that moment and says, "What are you doing? That's my bed, you fool! Get out! Get out!" It was really funny. Anyway, so that was it. I did something also very strange on the way back. I have only been telling this recently because it's so weird. But on the way back, and go figure, I didn't drink much, but I ended up under a blanket necking with a gay man. Not only a gay man, but a very gay man. And I'm not naming names, but it was like, why was that happening? And I was so sort of embarrassed about it for years, like I couldn't say. Anyway, that was my Darshan experience. Say, Baba.
My name is Jeff Allen from California. There we go. I identify somewhat with your story. A little closer, okay. I don't think my story's at...
Which flight?
New York, from Wisconsin. And I don't think my story's that special compared to whatever other people have talked about, but the points of connection I think are very interesting for all of us. And before I start, I think there's an idea here that maybe we should think about the impact, of the Darshan on our lives now, and what's happened maybe a year or two after the Darshan happened. Because I think that was really the overflow of what I think the Darshan was about, not just the event itself, but its impact on our lives, after, and even as it carried through into the future right now. So that's kind of what's been coming up for me in the days that I've been here. But the whole thing really started with, believe it or not, Joe Pine. Anyone remember Joe Pine?
Yes.
I was in college in '68 in Wisconsin, and was a night bird. I'd go to bed, as I do now, between 12 and 2 in the morning. And at 12, when I was bored, I'd watch television. And one night I was watching Joe Pine, and Alan Cohn was on. And I couldn't believe it, because Joe Pine would kill people that were of opposite point of view than conservative. And Alan Cohn was able to talk freely about Baba on TV. I thought, well, what is going on here? This is unusual for Joe Pine to act this way to somebody who's presenting an anti-drug message, yes, but also an Indian master. So I thought, okay, that clicked. Then I was part of the Free University, the University of Wisconsin. There were many of us that didn't like the curriculum, didn't care for what we had to study, the times. And we created a free university where TAs would create their own classes and courses in the rooms on the university, but then we'd have our own freedom to study what we wanted to. So there was a class called Poets for Mystics. I thought, that sounds interesting. So I went to it, and there was about 30 people in a very small room. And we sat there for 45 minutes in complete silence. And I was at the end of the table. I was thinking, okay, there's only one of two things could be happening. The teacher's either here, and he's goofing us, or he never showed up. We never knew. And not even if the class continued onward. But as the nervous energy of the room developed, people started talking about mystical experiences and then drug experiences. And then two guys behind me said, well, have you ever heard about Mayor Baba and his stand on drugs? And that kind of shut things down for a little bit. And then I said, these guys are interesting. I went back to their apartment. They had Mayor Baba posters and books all over the place. And I said, there's something here. So this was October of '68. So then in December, as a lark, we said, let's hitchhike and bus down to Myrtle Beach and check this thing out. So the three of us got our big Army duffel bags on our shoulders, and we literally hitchhiked and bused down to Myrtle Beach during the winter of December of '68. So when we got there, it was quite late at night, and all through my life I've been somewhat energetically sensitive, so it was kind of funny because when we approached the gate, I felt this electric field on the inside of the gate. Then I'd back up, and then I'd go, I said, what is going on here? Back and forth. And every time I'd move back 4 or 5 feet, I'd feel this electric current, surrounding and entering into the property here. So I said, well, that's a good sign. So, so we go in, and we get settled in, we get our rooms, and funny enough, I completely lost track of these two guys. I never saw them again for the week. I never talked to them or even interacted with them back on campus. They were into smoking dope a lot, but it was like this one, bouncing a ball off another ball, and I just lost track of them. We just didn't click, other than the Mayor Baba connection. So when I was at Myrtle Beach, like many people do, first time was a very powerful experience going to the Lagoon Cabin, especially Baba's house. And after Baba's house, I was kind of in a daze. I had some familiar experiences coming in the house and going in the house. And I was standing outside the gate just kind of in this spacey condition. And I walked over to the bench by the lagoon. And Elizabeth came over. And she said, you're going to the Darshan, aren't you? And I said, what's a Darshan? I mean, I knew nothing about all this at that time. So I said, maybe, I don't know. So she said, well, you need to go. Just like that, implored me that I needed to go. So I said, well, see, I had no money, as most of us didn't at that time. So I come back to campus and get back into school. And within about 6 weeks, I got a letter from the loan department saying that they miscalculated my finances when I applied for a student loan. And they were giving me $765 as a grant, not a loan. Wow. So that kind of kicked things in motion. So I instantly contacted whoever I had to contact, and they set me up on the plane going to New York. And I didn't know anybody. I was, as someone else mentioned, I was dressed. I had, a suit on. I was wearing long sleeve shirts. I had, 2 suitcases. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, where I was going. The funny thing is, when I came back to Myrtle Beach, I told my mother what I was going to do. My mother is a conservative Jew, comes from that background. And this was like in the Baptist story, telling somebody that I just met God in human form. You cannot, the anxiety and reaction from her was like profound. This was impossible, it was undoable, it was unthinkable. So I threatened her. I said, I'll drop out of school and I'll take whatever means necessary to go. She gave in. So
Was
I'm sorry?
Was Marshall Hay there?
Yeah. So basically, I didn't know anybody. I went on the plane, interacted with people, but there were kind of cliques already set up on, from the New York group as it was. So I was kind of, a loner at that time. When I got to India, it also felt like home. My roommates, I kept on looking at him. I know you. Where do I know you from? And of course, I never met him before, but we had obviously a past life connection. And again, one of my regrets is I don't keep journals. My experiences in India also are very vague and fragmentary. I remember major portions, the beginning. I guess the most curious thing is that when we were in the initial group to go up to Baba's chair, I felt uneasy. Now I find out other people are uneasy about that too, not having done it before, but also coming from an independent thinking background and also being Jewish. You don't do that stuff. So the nervousness developed, and eventually I went up there and I felt this urge not to bow to the chair, but to turn around and bow to the group. And I think I was the only person that did that. I just turned around, and it was kind of like Bob was saying, I acknowledge you all for being here. So I bowed to the group instead of to the chair, got up and went back to my seat. So that was the first, kind of push that, Bob, of course, had from early on. And then I had, we all had experiences in the room, in the Samadhi, tomb. And I think the most poignant experience I had was watching Mera and Mani, but especially Mera, suffering in the Samadhi tomb. I mean, it was unbelievable, the pain she was going through. And Mani was the epitome of serenity, in the midst of all that. So that was about it. I came back. And the other thing that was interesting, I felt too, being only there for that short time, when I came back to New York airport, I was hit with the big culture shock, which I think we all did, and it changed our lives. When I walked out of the train area and started looking at Americans, I was shocked at how egocentric and closed down we were as human beings. I'd come from an open environment, from India in particular, but in the Meher Baba experience with the community there. And when I came back to America, I was shocked at just watching people being so closed into themselves and so ego-bound. And that stayed with me for a long time. And then life went on. So there you go.
Thank you.
And our wonderful organizer.
I hesitate to tell you the whole story because it's in the Watertight Rosebud. But it did begin with a dream that I had maybe a year or 6 months before Darshan, where I was in a room with Meher Baba, and the men were running foot races. And so somebody came up to me and said, "Would you like to race Baba?" And I knew he had broken his hip, and I'm young, and I said, "Sure," because I thought I could beat him. So we stood, Baba and me, and this guy said, "On your mark, get set, go!" And I raced off to pretty much where Jim Meyer is over there. And I turned around, and in the process of going towards that location, I realized that I was racing towards God. And I turned around, and Baba was still standing at the starting point. He was already God, but he got me to start moving, which was my problem. And then the scenery changed, and he was sitting in a chair, and I just wanted to go up and climb in his lap, because as a 3 or 4-year-old, that was what I did with my dad. So I started to go towards him, and he shifted his hips a little because he had broken his hip, telling me, that maybe that wasn't good for him. And then he did this W on the chair arm. And it was a chair just like my father's chair that had these arms and slip covers and stuff. And it looked like he was going ow, O-W-W, but then I realized he was going O-M-M, om. So I woke up, and it was in the middle of the night, or maybe 5 in the morning, and it was thundering. And I felt like I'd come back from a very, very far place. Well, when I got to India, and I was in the flight, the Myrtle Beach flight, I remember looking at the blue chair with a picture in it and feeling very uneasy. And I didn't consciously focus on it, I just know it was there. And Erich said, "Congratulations, you kept your appointment with God." And I thought, well, that's nice. And Mara Garland did the picture. I don't know which one came first, but whatever. And then we were allowed to go up and bow down to the chair. And what came to my mind was that in the Episcopal Church that I'd grown up in, I would go up to the altar for Holy Communion and feel nothing. And I thought, have I come halfway around the world to start this all over again? I couldn't stand that idea. So I remember a line of maybe 3 or 4 people. And I got right up in that line, maybe I was the 5th person. And people went up and bowed down, and they burst into tears. And I thought to myself, they're surrendering to Baba. And I can't do that. Why don't I just go up and say hello to him? So I started towards the chair, and halfway there, the chair met me with its presence. And I did bow down to it, and I did bow down to the sandals, and I didn't feel like it was Holy Communion. And then they said,
grabbing me by the arm. And now we will go in to see Baba's room. And so I went into Baba's room, and they were not allowed to touch the chair that Baba did his work in, but we could. And I looked at the chair, and it was the chair in my dream. Baba had been sitting in that chair, came into my dream. And then I came outside of the room, and they handed us these pink papers that we could start to write our impressions on. And I was sitting on the stairs to Guru Prasad in the sun, writing my experience. And somebody came up and said, you know, you should not sit in the sun. Why don't you go over there in the shade? So I went to the stairs that were around the other side and finished writing. And I walked into the room, which was Mandalay Hall, and I recognized that room. It was the room where we ran the foot races. So Baba came into my dream, in my dream, as well as into this dream, and invited me to go. And I'm happy I did.
Come closer. So
Say your name.
My name is Andrea Winsemer, and I went on the New York flight with just a handful of people who are here today. I'm too tired to remember who they are, but it was just amazing. I think about my story is I was so young, and I went off to Alaska to make money to go to this Darshan. So I grew up in New York. I graduated high school in late May '67, and older friends who were going to Columbia University were going for the summer to San Francisco, to the Summer of Love. They wanted to, they had a rock group called the Druids of Stonehenge, by the way, and they wanted to make an album. Anyway, I got permission from my mother, and off I went with them. And we rented an apartment in San Francisco. And okay, so I didn't have a dad. He died when I was a baby. I had a mom, and she didn't know what to do with me because I was listening to rock and roll and driving her crazy. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. And but I was good. I'd always call her, so she let me do whatever I wanted. So I went to California for the summer, and I was into rock music, went to the Avalon Ballroom. I met Janis Joplin and all the people, Beefheart, and all those groups that were playing then. And I went off on my own one day, and I'm hitchhiking down a quiet park, a street, and this white T-bird comes going by. I'm hitchhiking back to the apartment. And it was either in July or August of '67, and this car goes by, and there was a dog. There were a lot of dogs. A lot of hippies had dogs that didn't have leashes. They just wandered around. And there must have been a dog following me that I didn't realize. So this car suddenly starts backing up from a long distance. Like he went past me, and they were thinking about, is that her dog? Let's see, pick her up hitchhiking. And anyway, it turns out to be Timothy Barnhart, who's a Baba lover and a Sufi now. But at that time, he grew up in Berkeley. His father taught at Cal, and his mother was a piano teacher. Anyway, he was a religious studies major, 21 years old. I was 17. And he had his friend Rob, the surfer, in the sports car, and he said, we can give you a ride if that's not your dog. Okay, and I get in, and I'm just looking up in the mirror, and he has these big blue eyes, and I was very drawn to him. And I just gave him the address, and he dropped me off. And I told my friends when I got home, my girlfriend, I wish I had talked to this guy. He just seemed so special. There was something about him. And 2 weeks later, there was a love-in in one of these parks, Golden Gate Park, Candlestick Park, one of the parks. And my girlfriend, who was dating the lead singer of this little Columbia rock group, she had a fight with him, so she agreed to go with me to the love-in. So we went together to the love-in, and we get there, and there's a stage supposed to be for some rock group. And the rock group doesn't show up, and there's just a scattering of people. And we think, wonder what happened? Well, we asked somebody. And the rock group canceled. Their flight was delayed. And so we're just wandering around, and I look over and sitting under a tree is the guy who picked me up hitchhiking, Timothy Barnhart, who I didn't know who he was, what his name was. The two guys were sitting there. I said, there's that cute guy who picked me up hitchhiking. Come on, let's go over and talk to them. And we did. And that's when I found out he was a religious studies major, and he had just taken, the important thing was, he had taken a trip, a psychedelic trip on STD or some name like that. It was triple the strength of LSD. And the most important thing he told me that day was that we have stopped taking drugs because it turned our brain to cream cheese. And for 3 days, and we were trying to have an altered higher experience, because he was a religious studies major. He grew up in Berkeley. He knew about gurus. And he said, drugs are not it. And of course, I'd been smoking pot, in high school music and art, all the artists smoked pot. And the musicians had to practice, they couldn't. And so, okay, where am I? Tim Barnhart. Okay, so he tells me no drugs. Yeah, okay, that sounds good. And so I liked him. I wanted to date him or something. So he invited me to Berkeley. He invited us to Berkeley. Have you ever seen Berkeley? No. Okay, you just take the bus and you meet me there. And the next day, my friend Leslie got back with her boyfriend, so she never accompanied me. She never heard about Baba. And I went, and for the rest of the summer, I hung out with Tim Barnhart, who wasn't a Baba lover yet. But, one day walking in the Haight-Ashbury, turns out it was Robert Dreyfus, because I asked him, he was handing out little cards, Baba cards, that said, LSD or love. It was pink. Maybe one of you got it. And I can't remember the quote right now, I have it at home, but it was no picture of Baba, and it had the Sufism address on the bottom, Sutter Street, I think. And it said something like, LSD is harmful physically, mentally, and spiritually, but if you love me as your real self, you will see me as the ocean of effulgence, some beautiful thing. And I wasn't, I wasn't studied in any of these things, but I was looking for meaning in life. I was looking for something, I was trying to be hip in the earlier, hip, music, but I really was looking for something higher than all this stuff that would sort of give me the answers. And so this was interesting. And then at Tim's friend's house one day, I saw the Don't Worry, Be Happy card. This is the summer of '67, so Rick must have made those cards by then. This is my memory. So I go back to New York, and I go to Hunter College, and I'm an art student, and Tim Barnhart sends me in the mail a letter explaining that, with a copy of the Universal Message. And I remember sitting at a cafe with a fellow student, reading it out loud, and so I'm reading it saying, how does it begin, that famous thing that Baba wrote, I've come not to teach but awaken, or something. And then and I said, isn't Tim so cool? And then I'd go back to reading it and saying, God, you should just meet this guy, Tim. He's so special. And I'm reading all of Baba's words and giving all the credit to Tim. And so, but I wanted to go back to California. That was the place that represented the spiritual life, something different. Like, this is an example. In New York, we dance like this. And in California, it was like this. So I wanted that new world, that world of freedom and beauty, great beauty. And so I finished the semester. I don't do well in my classes. I can't concentrate. I just want to go back, be around Tim, and go to California. So I get a job in January and February of '68 for my friend's father, who was a political cartoonist, and I opened his mail on Riverside Drive, and I worked for 2 months or 3 months, and I show up without letting Tim know. I show up one day with my 2 little suitcases in Santa Barbara, California. My cousin flew with me to LA. My mother made him do that. And He had long hair and everything. And I took the bus or train up to Santa Barbara, and I show up at Tim's door. Hi, I'm here. And he had become a Baba lover. In that letter he sent me with the universal message, he says, you know, dear Andrea, by the way, I'm going to follow everything that Meher Baba says in the discourses, and which of course we know meant celibacy and all the things that Baba's talking about. This was his new life. He was going for it. And I was just young. It all sounded wonderful to me. I didn't know. So I just went along with it. Sounds great, you know, sounds great. And I hadn't read anything except the Universal Message. So I get to Santa Barbara, where he's going to school. And he has 2 roommates. He's living in a house in Isla Vista. So now I have to apply to college, because that was the deal I made with my mom. And so I applied to the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland. Oh. And you didn't need good grades to get in there. You just needed a portfolio. And all right, so by that time, the little Santa Barbara group had formed. They're having, all I remember is there were meetings every week in Tim's living room, which had no furniture, and it had the poster. I was Rama, I was Krishna, I was this one, I was that one, and now I am Meher Baba. And I couldn't sleep in the same room with Tim because he was now going to be celibate and could keep women at a distance. So I had a little cot, a little mattress, I think, in the front room or something. And I'd sit there and I was reading. That's when I read the discourses, the spring of '68. Okay, so I'm there from April of '68. Somehow, the College of Arts and Crafts starts in September of '68. So I go up there. Meanwhile, I'm becoming a Baba lover just naturally. I go up to meet Agnes Barron, met Rick Chapman, and so on. So I met the California people. I'd never been to the center. And so I'm going to the college and started to get family letters sent to me. And I'm in touch with Tim down in Santa Barbara. And he came up for Thanksgiving. I remember we had a vegetarian Thanksgiving. And we went around Berkeley and we collected homeless people and brought them to my house that I was renting with a few other art students. I remember that. And I'd go to the Baba meetings that Rick Chapman and Paula Gordon ran at the university. I saw my first Baba films and all that. And it's very inspired, you know. So anyhow, we get the message from the Mandali that Baba's invited us to India in October, and I have the rest of the semester, and I can't concentrate on my art classes, and I'm getting bad grades. I'm determined to get a job and go to India. Somehow I just barely pass my classes, and while I was in Santa Barbara has a school to teach people how to fly small airplanes, and I met a couple that were 28 years old. I was 18, and they sort of parented me, and I needed some parenting. I remember she taught me what an avocado was, and how to crochet, and how to cook, and they were there just so he could learn how to fly a small plane in Alaska. So I used to hang out over there, and she didn't use drugs. Anyway, she said, well, we're leaving soon, but if you ever need any work, you know, they don't have many women up in Alaska. You can always come up there and make much better money than you can make down here. Come on, we're up there. You can come anytime you want. And I remembered that. And so when Baba announced the Darshan, I was like a long-haired art student with my, you know, bell bottoms and a raccoon coat, I remember. And I remember walking out to, you know, the main drag in Oakland, looking down at IHOP, thinking, did I get a waitress job there? No, they're not going to hire me. I had never done anything except work in the school cafeteria and be a babysitter or something. So I thought, I'm going to call these people in Alaska, or I wrote to them, or I don't know how. Come on up. So on January 4th, 1969, student half-fare or standby, off I go to Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska. Why? The minimum wage in California was $1.65, and it was $3.50 in in Alaska. But also a dozen eggs cost $5. So but anyway, I get there, and they scoot me off to the Army-Navy store. They get me clothes to keep me warm, and it was the middle of winter. Okay, now it's only days before Meher Baba drops his body. So I'm in Alaska. I had no communication with anyone. My forwarding address had been given to someone to forward my mail eventually. So I get a job 70 miles outside of Anchorage, where this couple was building an A-frame spec house. And there was a wonderful ski lodge called Mount Alyeska, looking out on the mountain, and they hired me to bus tables. And they helped me find a little cabin for $25 a month. I lived by myself in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, about I walked half a mile to the ski lodge. I would bathe in the bathroom. It was just a cabin with a chemical toilet and a potbelly stove. And the water would all freeze every night. So everything froze every night. I'd get into the sleeping bag and I'd sleep in the freezing room. There was a tin potbelly stove. Anyway, I had this job, and now I was sending my money to Phyllis Frederick. Unlike Chris Barker, who there sounded like there was a deadline to get the money in, I don't remember that at all. I was sending my money in every week or every 2 weeks, somehow, maybe through Union, Western Union, I don't know how. But, so I'm working there, and it's about February, it must have been about February 20-something. And I get a big packet of mail. All came at once in a manila envelope. I remember being in this room, and I put it in numerical date order, and I start reading it, and it's the family letters, but all at once, all those letters telling me Baba had dropped his body. And so there I'm reading that, so I didn't know what's going on. Then I opened the next letter, and I forget now exactly which letter said what, but ultimately they said, you are still, the Darshan's on. So I sort of had to pass through the grief and the disappointment and then be joyous that the Darshan was still on and go ahead with this plan. So I keep working, but the flight was canceled. The Southern California flight that the Santa Barbara group was going with was canceled, so I had to start sending my money to Anna Rosa, and I did. So somehow, around May 28th, I flew to New York, where my mother was, and all my Santa Barbara friends, including, I hadn't met Mary Ann yet, but she was going to UC Santa Barbara, and she was coming to the Darshan. We all met at my mother's apartment in Brooklyn, where we slept, and then we had to go for an orientation meeting with Harry Kenmore at the Society. And I didn't like adults in authority. I grew up with my mother, and that was enough. And I was like, who's this guy telling me, Anyway, so we go to so I made my money by and Mani was so excited because she said, where's the girl from Alaska? We have a Baba lover from Alaska. I remember that. It's like, well, I'm sort of from Alaska. But I was. Now I had to go back to Alaska after the Darshan to work, to make money, to afford to go back to school. But it was all like nothing. Oh, that's what you do, Baba. Somehow Baba made it all possible. So I go to the Darshan, and I'm in the Pune Club, which was wonderful, with Phyllis Frederick and the Little California group. And my highlights of my Darshan experience are, of course, that amazing Deccan Queen train trip with the orange sky and the purple, and just going through India. It was like a time-space warp. Incredible just to be in India. I also felt like I was home. But if any of you know Mustache Ron Omerod, chiropractor from California, he talked the whole time about mucusless diet healing, if any of you remember that.
He still does.
oranges, have an orange, And so, okay, so the first day of Darshan. So I was a self-conscious young person, and I pretty much, like someone else, waited till there were 10 people left to go up and tell. So I'm watching everyone, how they take Darshan and how you do it, and just thinking, okay, I'll do it soon, but not yet. And I kept waiting. And meanwhile, if any of you remember, there was a painting of the bottom of Baba's feet. It's now in the Blue Bus in Marizad. I believe it's the same paint. I thought, what the hell is that? I was an art student, though. I thought, how interesting. Someone's doing a painting of bottom of Baba's feet. So, there were lots of things like that I was still trying to figure out. And one was, of course, bowing down. And so finally, I knew I had to go and bow down. I couldn't wait any longer, It was like almost empty. So I get up and I get up there and I go up and bow down, and I don't know if it was just, the build-up of what's going to happen and all that, but I was one of the people who broke down crying and weeping, and Baba's sandals were to the right, I think, of the chair. And somebody helps me up, and I somehow after that, it's just a blur. I do remember being in Baba's bedroom, and I remember seeing Baba's pink coat. And I just sort of had that blissful high, but also the opening of the heart, the tears, the relief, all this built up expectation, and finally. So then, many of you have seen my pictures sitting in front of Mara on the women's side. There's 2 pictures in the New Balna 2 book and in Heather's book. There happens to be, because Mani and Mara are in that picture, and I'm sitting in front, and Mary Ann's there. And so the first day I'm way in the back, and I'm holding back. And then by the next day, I'm already, this is my family, I'm at home, and this is working. So I'm sitting in the front now. And because I was a kid in the music scene in '66, I was very young when I met Jimi Hendrix before he was famous. And I was very much sort of a music lover. And I get to, and as Louise says in The Empty Chair, there was no Baba culture. We didn't have a Baba culture. I didn't know what it was yet. You get to Guru Prasad, and you start to see this is what happened around Baba: singing, jokes, serious, loving family, crying, weeping, so I remember all the music performances started, and I'm like, okay, Harold Rudd singing "Mammy, How I Love You," Baba, how I love you, how I love you, and I'm going, oh God, this is corny, and all this, I'm making all these judgments and everything, but so that was, the Darshan for me was a breaking down of all these New York kind of hip, what's cool, what's hip, what's this, what's that, or what's meaningful. And that all sort of slowly broke down, but I remember, to my great relief, Ronnie Lane arrived at the end of the Darshan after all this, Baba music, I'm thinking, okay, yeah. And Ronnie Lane gets up there and sings "Once I Was a Stone" many years ago, and so I thought, oh good, there's somebody cool, there's somebody. And of course, Mani was a fantastic, amazing presence at the Darshan, and I don't know, she impressed me the most. When I went out on these ST buses, we went out to go to Mehrabad, and as everyone said, the bus, if you sat in the back, the bus went over the bumpy roads, and it was dusty, but who was I sitting next to? Me, without the huge intellect of some people, Dr. C.D. Deshmukh. And the whole time going to Mehrabad, he's talking to me. And, I'm just saying, and I'm like, I'm looking for people my age somewhere to talk to, you know, because I couldn't follow him. I don't know. Do you remember that, Mary? I do. He was just talking to me the whole time. I don't know what he said, but it must have gone in. Must have gone in. And then I did have that experience that people talk about in the samadhi of the, like, total cessation of the world, like a void, a total stopping of the mind. It was when I bowed down in the tomb. I was nervous about it. It was a tomb after all. It was fresh with soil, and I was nervous about it. But again, I waited till after many people had already taken Darshan. It was quiet. And I remember that, this complete cessation of the world. That I don't know how else to describe it. It was stopping of the mind. And I was very impressed with Padre. And maybe I even did we meet Sidhu back then? I don't know. But I think that's about it. And of course, don't forget, we saw lepers on the streets of Pune. We saw that wonderful guy who rolled around on a little board. And it was boiling hot. It was jet lag. And I always try to figure out why Baba arranged this so we would go in the summer. Because I think the 62 Darshan was in the fall, wasn't it? Yeah, I thought he just seemed to want to have our brains just shut down and our hearts open. And that's it.
Jai Baba.
So preparing to come to, you gonna tell me how to use a microphone?
Yes, I
Jai Baba. Start it now. In preparing to come to Myrtle Beach for the anniversary, I felt a little bittersweet about it because back in 1969, I was singing to Baba, but I wasn't doing it publicly because I was too shy. My relationship with Bob Brown helped bring me out of that shyness, because if he could do it, I could do it. But I was feeling a little bad because I didn't get to perform at the Darshan, and I'm a performer. And so I was looking through my papers, and it suddenly dawns on me that I actually was in 2 plays that we presented at the Darshan, but I had completely and utterly forgotten that these plays took place. And to this day, I cannot recall actually performing in these plays. And in fact, almost everybody who was at that Darshan does not remember these plays. So the first thing I want to do is I want to acknowledge the fact that in this day, at this moment, we're a very small portion of the group that went to the 1969 Darshan. A great number of these people have passed on. And it was brought home to me because when I was going through my papers, I found the program, which I was surprised to see here since nobody acknowledged that this actually took place. This is the program for the 2 plays, The Stranger and the Moon. Each one was a 1-act play written by Frances Brabazon. And Jane Haynes, in her wisdom and her skill as an actress and a director, thought it would be a wonderful idea if the people who worked at the Mayher Center, which she called the Myrtle Beach family, would put on these plays. And so when I was looking at this program, I realized that there's only 3 or 4 of us left from the original 11 or 12 people who actually performed this. So I want to, just in memory, before I get into the specifics about this play, in memoranda, in memory, Marshall Hay, Dolly Lux, Claire Benning, Dorothea Bowens, Nancy Hay, Lynn Ott, and of course Jane, Barry Haynes, who is the director, are all passed and are with Baba now. Those remaining are Phyllis Ott.
Say again.
Phyllis Ott, she's still with us. Jim Meyer. Margaret Haynes. And Wendy Haynes. And Sheila Krinsky was not in the plays, but she is, her name is in as she played the tape recorder and she printed the program. So remember all of those fine folks. So I found the program and I realized, goodness, I was involved with these plays. I don't remember this at all. But I do remember, this is the anecdotes, I do remember what led up to us performing these plays at Guru Prasad, which was that when we arrived at Guru Prasad, half of the people were either fainting or in heat prostration. We went and did a final run through, and half the people were collapsed. It was just, nobody remembers these plays because I don't think they were memorable, but when I mentioned this to Wendy, I said, Wendy, now that I have you in front of me, did we actually perform these? Because I had, in the back of my mind, I kind of remembered that maybe half of us were had fainted, and so they couldn't carry on. And she said, oh, and so this is the anecdote. She said, oh yes. She said, I remember while we were doing the performance, she looked down, and there was Francis Brabazon, and he was crying. And later he said to her, this is the first time any of my plays have ever been performed in public. Isn't that beautiful? So I did get to perform for Baba. Don't remember it at all. Literally have no remembrance. I remember Jane got sick. And she said, Jim, I can't do the final run through. You're going to have to be the director. So I want to point out to you, it says I'm the stage manager and I also played the youth in the play The Moon, but I was also an assistant director. Okay?
I had a boyfriend named Paul Matthews, and Elizabeth asked us if we would sing at the Darshan in one of the programs, and we both said yes. Paul was a music major, very eager to sing for people, and I was a shy little thing who really was afraid for years to let my voice be heard even. But since Elizabeth had asked, I thought it would be good for me, good for Elizabeth, good for Baba, good for Paul, so I agreed. Okay, so we get to India. The day comes that we're going to Guru Prasad to sing. And I was scared out of my wits. I could hardly swallow my breakfast. And there were a couple of people at the table. Alan Wagner was one. And Alan kept saying, Paul's going to break a string. He's going to play the wrong chord. You won't know your note. It's going to be a mess, until I just got so, that it gave me a little courage. We go over to Guru Prasad. And Francis Brabazon is there, and he tells us where to sit. Francis is here, I'm here, and Paul is here. And we're sitting right up there on the floor, right by the microphone. And I'm going, oh God. And so Francis reads some of his work. I think it was Word at World's End, which had not yet been published. And I'm just looking down at the floor, shaking, and I look over here and I see Francis Brabazon's toes are twitching like crazy. And then I looked up a little and his pants were shaking, like his knees were trembling. And then I looked up and his papers were rattling just slightly. I'm going, oh my God, he's a Mandali. So he finally finishes and sits down and he leans over to me and he says, I get terrible stage fright, you know. I couldn't believe, it just blew my mind. A Mandali and he gets stage fright? So I still don't know what's going to happen, whether any sound will come out of my mouth, but then it's suddenly time for Paul and me to stand up. And we did. And then it was like smooth as silk. Smooth as silk. And Paul started to play and we started to sing. And Baba just made it so beautiful. So thank you, Baba.
Well, I've been listening to all this, and I don't remember much at all. You know, about actually little snippets, like we rented bikes and would go to Guru Prasad when they said board the buses. We didn't have to because we had our bikes. Going to the tailors, you know, things like that. I mean, I love Guru Prasad, but I do remember that shortly before we left for Darshan, I got a telegram. And it was from Alan Cohen in Hawaii, and he was on his way back from the first group, the California group. And he said, when you get to Guru Prasad, find Francis Brabazon and identify yourself. I'm like, oh, well, okay. And I knew Alan because we'd been getting what we called gigs for him on TV and radio whenever he came to Chicago, and arranging talks at the university and things like that, you know, anti-drug kind of talks and things like that. So I knew Alan, that's how he knew my address, I guess. So I get to Guru Prasad and I eventually find Francis. And I remember he was always kidding. What I remember is he said to me, my roommate was there, my roommate from freshman year, and she was my roommate my housemate in the apartment where we had Baba meetings in Chicago. He said, your roommate says you snore. I'd never heard that. I know he was kidding me, but he was funny. But anyway, it turns out that he had the manuscript of The Word at World's End. I guess he'd written it a few years before and it hadn't been published, as she said. And I was taking courses at the University of Chicago with Henry Rago, who was the editor of Poetry, the magazine for poets. And he was a friend of all the poets. He was, you know, I was taking courses with him in the Divinity School Literature and Divinity or something courses. And so I knew Henry Rago was taking courses with him, and the idea was to bring the manuscript back to the U.S. to him to see if he might read it and review or comment on it. So I get back from Darshan, get back to the university, you know, it was right in the middle of a semester or quarter when we went to India, and I go to see Mr. Rago, and he always called everyone by, very politely, he called me Miss Pierpont, you know, and he said, now for my report from India. He was always the utmost respectful of everyone and everything. And he always talked respectfully and treated everyone like that. And so I told him, I guess, about Darshan and Mayor Baba. And I don't know if it was that day or a very short time after, Phil Lutgendorf and I, who did a lot of what we call Baba work around the campus there, we would sometimes make posters and we would plaster the whole campus with them because we were an official Baba group and had the okay to do that. In fact, just a little sideline before I get back to Henry Rago. Once we had our meetings at this building called Ida Noise, and the person in charge of those made this big banner once that stretched across the middle of the campus. So you had to walk under it. And for days I couldn't figure out what it said, because it said, "I have come not to teach, but to awa ken." Awa ken, what is that? And I finally realized, this is our poster. This is Awaken. But anyway, so I had a beautiful blessed picture of Baba. It was with a little Indian girl. You'd probably recognize it from the 50s. Very beautiful. And we had a print shop next door to where I was living. And we went and had posters made that said, "Now is the time for all to know that I am God in human form." Philip wrote it out in his nice calligraphy, and we had them printed on yellow and on pink. And I took them to Henry Rago and showed them to him, and he looked at each one. He finally took one, and I don't remember if it was yellow or pink, but he took that and he had that. Well, he was only 53 years old, and within a very short time, he suddenly, to everyone's shock, dropped the body. It was a shock to the professors, and I had to tell one of the professors the news. I mean, it was a total shock. And so being one of his students and devoted students, I somehow ended up being part of the party at the funeral. And he was a practicing Catholic. And his poetry was all about light and the word. And here he had this manuscript in his possession when this happened. And I remember that the service was so beautiful. His wife, Juliet, was it Juliet Ellis? Juliet Rago, I think.
I knew Carmela.
Yeah, the daughter. But she was dressed in white. She was radiant. It wasn't black and tears and all that. He was always radiant. I once delivered a late paper to his house on the north side and saw him and his wife just looking in store windows. It was just like they saw the light and beauty and everything, but the experience was so strong at that service, I almost wanted to become a Catholic. I didn't, because I was with Baba. It was and on the way home from the funeral, I was in a car with a bunch of professors. They were all talking about Meher Baba. It was so amazing. Yeah. And another thing, I'm just remembering that, I just got another picture, because I went back later after I graduated, and Ellis and Phil, a bunch of people were living up in Evanston, right? And I knew that the cemetery was there, and I had a kind of a glimpse of where they dug the plot or something. I wasn't that much into cemeteries or this kind of thing, but I just had, you get these inner impulsions, and I said, I'm gonna go for a walk, and I know this walk is gonna be a picture of my life. So I went for a walk to find the gravestone, wherever it was. I looked and looked and looked and looked, and I would see things like, here was Henry Rago, started with H. I would see Hope, and I knew I was close, but I couldn't find it. I would see other things that started with H. And finally I walked to the very end of the graveyard. I was hot, I was tired, I was thirsty. I knew I had to go to the very end, and I kind of give up. Just kind of get there and say, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I was calling on Baba. I don't remember what I was doing. But when I walked back, suddenly there it was in the grass. It was just a flat little quiet thing. It wasn't anything big or flashy, and I felt like I was found, and that's where I kind of collapsed in tears. And that one I do remember. And it's happened that way. Often you just get to the end of your rope, and you don't know what's going to happen next, and then it's like you're found, and you've always been in his hands, and it was supposed to be that way. So that's about Henry Rago and the word at World's End, and I guess we eventually got the manuscript back, but we didn't have his comments on it. But
What about at the Darshan?
Oh, that's tomorrow.
Yeah. I wrote things like on that pink paper that every time I heard Baba's name I would dissolve in tears, but I don't remember it. I don't consciously remember. And I went up, I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to go up to his chair. I don't remember anything that happened. But somebody later said to me, you really got Darshan. I went, oh, I did? I don't know. So what you experience sometimes is not at your conscious level. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think I may have scattered
thoughts to add from hearing these accounts. First, on my experience on that first day of Darshan, no one has mentioned that after Erich said his beautiful opening line, that bird started singing up in the clear story.
Yes.
It was just sublime. And I'm surprised at the number of people that have spoken today who are in the last dredges of the participants, and that the room had started to become empty, because I sat there and every time I would start to get up, someone would go by me, and I got very angry at all these people that were breaking in line, or that there wasn't a line. But eventually, and the clock reached 11, and the darshan was to stop at 11. But of course, there were more people that had not yet had a chance to bow at Baba's chair, so they continued it. But when the clock went 11, I could see the mandali starting to get nervous. And eventually they rounded the people that were left up and within 10 feet of Baba's chair. And we were in a half arc in front of the chair. There were about 7 of us. And I had been sitting further back, and this was the first time that I was within a closer distance of the chair. And what I experienced, just standing there waiting my turn, because we went down the line of the arc one at a time, there was this tornado of energy swirling around that chair, so that I was like having trouble keeping my balance. No experience of that one by sitting further back. So anyway, I bowed. I went to my knees and I kissed Baba's sandals. And I did it with such force that I smacked them, I smooched them, and I made this really, to me, the loudest noise in the world. And what went through my mind was, even here, I make a total fool of myself. So, and I'd had a very uncomfortable time waiting for my turn. And in fact, I had gone through these episodes of panic where I thought if I went up and I bowed that I might die. I mean, there was a lot of turmoil. So when I stood up, I totally lost my mind. And it was like wiped clean. And there was just a vacancy up here. So I just wanted to say that many people have said that they don't remember this and that. And I think the reason for that is that Baba did quieten the mind and maybe wiped it out for the time being. And when I turned to walk out, I had no idea where I was, and that's why those people were coming and taking us by the arm. That was, it wasn't accidental, in other words. But what I also discovered, which has been referred to, is that out on the veranda, there was this incredible thing going on, because from Baba's chair to the doors of Mandali Hall, I was like overwhelmed. But when we went through the door, I started seeing all these people hugging and crying. And so this was that kind of the aftershock of the Darshan moment. And of course, then I was led to Baba's bedroom
for that bowing down. Okay, so that there's that. Then one thing was on the day that we went to Mehrabad, I was in Baba's Samadhi when Henry Khashoggi, with his trombone, played Begin the Begin. And of course, Henry broke down while he was playing, and he lost his breath, so that he went off key, and I know that for the rest of his life, that he was very unhappy that he had not been able to do it for Baba perfectly. But my experience, and I told Henry this, and he never believed me, but I said, I was inside the tomb when you did that, and it was the most sublime thing I've ever heard. And the expression of grief when he would go off key was just, it was so, it thrilled my heart. You know how some grief is healing. And anyway, so Henry never was able to understand that. So, and I think I can't remember any more things. So, Jai Baba.
Yeah. Jai Baba, everyone. The one thing I want to say is that this is remembrance of what I would love to have happen here is the presence of Baba, which I guess is here anyway, but I'd like to feel it deeply, and I hope all of you will feel it deeply. This is Baba's Darshan and our experience of it. So I am begging Baba to come to us in our hearts and enliven us now. All right, now as far as remembrance of the Darshan itself.
Name and group?
Oh, New York.
Name?
Myrtle Beach.
Myrtle Beach. No, I'm a Myrtle Beach person, but I went with New York.
But was it?
Group aside as the bus came in. And that bird was a very happy bird, and I don't pay that much attention to birds as a rule. But this one sprang out so full of internal happiness that you could tell that this bird was in a kind of an ecstasy. And that set the tone, just going through the gate in the bus. Walked up the steps, we sat there in the hall, and they told us, one thing they told us, that we didn't have to go up there. We could sit it out if we wanted to. They also told us that this was a time of courage and to take full advantage, because these opportunities to be in the presence of God didn't happen very often, and we should remember this and take great courage, take a real chance to make this darshan work. So I didn't know what that meant. And rather than go into what I did about it, I'm just going to say that was part of what the instruction we had. And there was also a moment of silence. And I remember that moment of silence was so profound that it occurred in 3 levels. We quieted down more, and then we were inhumanly quiet. I could not hear a sound. There might have been 150 people or so in there, and I could not hear anything. I actually strained my hearing to listen for the traffic outside on the street, just to know that my ears were still working. It didn't last long, but then I think the darshan began. That we'll cover some more in our next sessions. Jai Baba.
There's a picture of me outside Guru Prasad going in the first day where I'm like And I remember being just so thrilled. And I was going like this.
What's your name?
David Bradley. I was on the Myrtle Beach flight. Came from Evanston with Ellis and Dee Dee and Mimi Drake. And I will say that, and I've seen myself on the film, I will say that my memories are a whirl, and I do remember there were moments of great happiness and moments of great misery when I was got sick and I was in my room, and this was after, I want to say the sequence is all muddy in my mind, but I was in my room and I felt like Baba was coming in and checking on me. I didn't see Baba, I didn't have a vision, but I just felt the presence, and I would grumble at Baba. But it was an intense darshan with Almighty God, and it's still going on. And there really isn't much I can say beyond that. It's just, it's what I think I was born for, and so thank you.
So coming to Baba was an adventure in itself. I was on my way to Florida with Seymour Silverstein, and he brought the book God Speaks with him. And we were reading it like we were reading it from the moon or from Mars. We are evolved consciousness. We are here to experience our true selves. And my friend Pam and I were just laughing at it. But we got to Miami, and Pam and I wanted to go to the beach. So he dropped us off on 179th Street, never being in Miami before, and him telling us that he's a Baba lover, he loved Baba. And so all of a sudden, out of my ear, I heard somebody saying, Meher Baba, and that's by the beach. And it turned out to be Eddie and Erwin Lugg and another person, and it was like, we were so excited for Seymour. It was like, oh my God, Seymour, we have somebody here that knows Meher Baba. And the three of them looked at us like we were crazy. You know, what are these two young women going to the beach in their little bathing suits, zooing? Anyway, that night, it was a meeting at Mae Bundy's house in Florida, and we all went, and I felt something as soon as I walked into that house, and she had a sunken living room and a very large picture of Meher Baba with beads on top. And it was just stunning and beautiful, and I felt in my heart that something's happening. And at that time, there were a lot of young people coming to Baba, and this was 67. And anyway, then of course, fast forward a little bit, and hearing about Meher Baba dropping the body was pretty devastating and sad, and I decided I'm going to go to India anyway, like everybody else did that's in this room, or most of us anyway. So I got to India, and I too felt as soon as I stepped off the plane that I was home, that this smell of India just like permeated through me, and that was almost like a darshan in itself. It was so strong and powerful, but yet we had more coming to us. So the first day of darshan, I felt really inhibited. I saw the whole crowd of people sitting there, and I was looking at everybody, and people were walking up and taking darshan, and I'm thinking, when is it my turn? You know, I was very nervous about when is it my turn and what would I do, and I felt very uncomfortable. But when I finally went up there and I did bow down, and through you guys, I'm remembering the sandals and being part of that feeling of bliss in a way. I thought I didn't feel anything, but now that you're refreshing my memory, I felt bliss, and it was very lovely, and I kind of went out, and that was that experience. But then what happened was I think it was heat stroke or sanskaras burning up, one or the other. But I just had finished going into the blue bus and taking Darshan, and all of a sudden I felt like I was burning up from the tip of my toes to the top of my head inside. It was just, I was out of it, and I was very shy, so I didn't want to tell anybody. And so they found out, obviously, because I couldn't function. And they laid me down on a piece of stone or something, and they're fanning me, and my eyes are closed. I'm repeating Baba's name the whole time, because I really thought I was going to die. I mean, I really, really thought that. And I'm going, Meher Baba, Meher Baba, Meher Baba. And I just couldn't function. But then all of a sudden I started coming out of it, and I look up and there is Darwin Shaw, Fred Winterfeld, and Adi Irani all looking down at me, smiling, like this big, big grin, and fanning me. And it was kind of like I was saying, it's like the Wizard of Oz, like you were there and you were there and you were there. And it was very interesting, and I felt badly that night. And I was roommates with Cindy. She left or something for a minute. Anyway, and I had the doctor come, and everything worked out fine. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks,
I am Marianne Barnhart, and the famous Timothy Barnhart fits into this story. I'm not going to tell how I got there, which was wonderful to me. Someone asked me last night, it was Jeff Lowe, what is your overall memory of the most poignant thing that you can remember about Darshan? And I don't remember stuff. And so I thought about it, and I said, awe. I just felt awe from the moment before Darshan, when I was able to go to Darshan. I just felt awe. And so I laughed and I said, I guess it was awesome. So I had an awesome time, and I thought that's kind of how I am. But today, I just am kind of like that. I'm a sort of Pollyanna person. But today I was thinking that Pollyanna person wasn't there before Darshan. So from the Darshan, I started feeling that awe. And that wasn't the story I was going to tell you, because the story I'm going to tell you, Andrea said, oh, just tell that to people. It's the one thing I really remember the most clearly from Darshan. I was with the infamous Timothy Barnhart, and we were walking on the veranda, just walking along, talking, and Erich was coming toward us very quickly. He was coming toward us very quickly and bumped, just a little bump, into Tim's shoulder. And he stopped. And he put his hand on Timothy's shoulder. And he looked right into his eyes, and he said, "Excuse me, brother." And I will never forget the presence that I knew about from that moment. That's all.
I'd just like to say this has been a wonderful afternoon. So many beautiful stories. Thank you, each and all. Avatar, Meher Baba ki jai.